Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. It is my great pleasure to introduce the second webinar for our series. Let me share my screen very quickly. All right. So the topic for today is just in time or just in case. This is part of the webinar series that we are hosting as College of Operational Excellence, which is part of the annual POMS conference or POMS Society. Today's topic, as I said, is just in time or just in case. Everyone has been hearing a lot about just in time. Actually, to our great dismay, just in time is being blamed for pretty much everything in supply chain disruptions during this COVID era. But before we get into the very meaty topics of, what is causing these issues, do we have a misunderstanding of just in time? Or is it really truly to be blamed for the disruptions that we are facing? Let me first go through quickly in terms of what the college stands for, who are the organizers, and then introduce the panelists. First, a very big thank you to our sponsors. None of this would be possible without our sponsors. They not only help us support with our college, but also things like the webinar, best paper award ceremonies, and all that. The team, who are the organizers or in the board for College of Operational Excellence, you can see them on your screen. Morgan Swink is the president and part of the advisory committee. The other members, and you can see their titles, are Professor Gupesh Anand, Vidyaranya Gargeya, Torbjorn, Matthias, Eric Olsen, and then we have three other members of the advisory committee, me, Rachna Shah, John Shook, and Peter Ward. Now moving on to today's topic. I am the moderator. My name is Professor Rachna Shah. I'm a faculty at Carlson School of Management. I'm joined here by an esteemed group of scholars, and I'll go through them very quickly. Stephan Wagner, he's at ETH Zurich. Nanda Sanders at Northeastern University. Mohan Sodhi, who's at University of London City College, and Tom Choi, who's at Arizona State University. Mohan, you might be at a different school, so when you introduce yourself, please correct if we got that wrong. So I would advise each of the panelists to introduce themselves in the next 2 to 3 minutes, and also sort of address the issue of, from their perspective, what is JIT, whether they want to take the research perspective or the practice perspective. Let's quickly go through. I'll start with Stephan, you.
Stephan Wagner, as Rachna said, ETH Zurich. I'm a professor of supply chain management and the director of the Humanitarian Operations and Supply Chain Management Lab. I do research broadly on logistics, supply chain, buyer-supplier relationships, and other supply chain related topics. I think more important, the question, what is just in time? Today's topic. It's an inventory management model, inventory management system as others are, vendor managed inventory, just in case, consignment stock, just one of many. So nowadays people think that everything is just in time. That's not the case. Just in time does not mean shifting inventory to the supplier. That's also sometimes something that people think we don't have inventory anymore, so that's not just in time. I personally distinguish and say just in time is something that occurs between organizations. So between a supplier and a buyer, just in time, not within the factory. I use the term Kanban for this, although the just-in-time approach also could be based on Kanban in a narrow sense. But for me, just-in-time always means a delivery from the outside. So outside the organization, outside the factory walls from a supplier. That's what I consider just-in-time. Why do I emphasize that? Because the problem oftentimes comes if these outside entities do not deliver. If I have it within the factory, I have a much stronger control within the factory, within the hierarchy of the firm. But this emphasizes for me the criticality of the relationship with my supplier, where I get these shipments from. So that's I think sometimes in the terminology, both in practice even more, but also in academia, we don't have this clarity in terms of what does just-in-time actually mean. And this is already the first recommendation I would like to give, this construct clarity, define upfront what it is. In the current discussion, many things are kind of mangled together and lead to more fuzziness than clarity in this. So that's a first observation.
Yeah, so we will be talking about sort of the myth and reality of just-in-time. But for the first question, let's very quickly sort of go through what, from your perspective, is just-in-time. So Tom, would you introduce yourself and also talk about what, from your perspective, is just-in-time?
Yeah, I'm Tom Choi, professor of supply chain management at Arizona State University. I do research on the upstream side of supply chain, more of taking a network perspective. So for that, I, over the years, worked with Honda and Toyota quite a bit. And the first time I saw JIT in action was when I was visiting Toyota Camry plant and Johnson Controls plant in Georgetown, Kentucky. So Camry is the best-selling sedan in the U.S. for the past 3-4 decades or so, and Johnson Controls makes car seats for Camry. So I go to this Johnson Controls plant, and I see all the seats assembled in sequence. So Johnson Controls gets Kanban, as Stephan pointed out. Johnson Controls gets Kanban from Toyota every day. And then the 2-door sedan, 4-door sedan in different colors, fabric, leather, whatever the case may be, they're sequenced. And there is no finished goods inventory at that point. So they go right into a back of a semi-truck. And then when it's filled and they take off, get to the Camry plant. And then the back of the semi opens up and then merges into Toyota production system seamlessly. I mean, this was really an amazing sight to behold. So that's kind of what I have as to JIT means. And I guess we're going to talk about myths and stuff like that. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now, and then we can talk about where Toyota really places their inventory perhaps later.
Yeah, so from your perspective, just-in-time is arriving just in time to be used in the right place, if you will, if we were to just kind of put that label.
Yeah, so
there is definitely more to it that we will discuss, but that's sort of one perspective of it. Nanda, we'll go next to you. Please quickly introduce yourself as well as your perspective.
Thank you, Rachna. First, I want to say thank you for having me. I want to thank the panel. I'm really honored to be with these amazing people. Nanda Sanders, I'm a professor at Northeastern, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different view. My first contact with just-in-time was in the 90s out of my PhD program, and I did have that really inventory focus, Kanban, all of it. But as I work with companies, I really began to take more of a bird's eye view and really understand that one size does not fit all, that strategy and people interplay on top of it. The kind of product you have, do you not only have inventory in place, but you have machines, processes, people at the right place at the right time. And so I really see just-in-time as this broad set of tenets that governs operational excellence. I cannot see that going away. We need to modify it. We need to evolve with the times. We are in a time period where when rapid change, and that's not going to go away. But to me, saying, are we going to replace just-in-time with just-in-case? We had just-in-case in the 70s and 80s and 60s, and where we had these bloated supply chains and inventory everywhere. Just in time is this magnificent philosophy that has tenets that not only implement, that use Kanban from an inventory standpoint, but that, we could talk, I've done training with companies where we spend an entire day on housekeeping, where you're looking at, eliminating waste in a simple way, color coding. And I can honestly tell everybody, when I implemented it in my office, for example, it was marvelous because I could actually find things exactly where I put them. Obviously I fall off the wagon and I do it again, but it's incredible. So saying we're going to abandon all this is like saying, I'm going to leave, keeping a calendar. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to have ad hoc scheduling. I just think that we need to understand that we can't have a blanket statement. And this applies to practice, it applies to research, because we need researchers and scholars to really go into nuances to help practice understand the kinds of products you have. One size does not fit all. Obviously, if you have commodity versus innovative products, how you're going to apply this is going to be very, very different. Has this contributed to the bullwhip effect? Right now it's in the popular press and all of it. I think it's really simplistic to say it has. Again, I think we're going to have to use caveats to just in time moving forward. And I think practice needs to apply that. I think researchers, scholars need to delve into that more.
So we will talk a lot more about, what are the pitfalls of just-in-time and how, if it needs to be modified and how it might be modified in future. So hold on to those thoughts. Mohan, last not the least, would you like to introduce yourself? Yes, thank you.
I'm Mohan Sodhi. I'm a researcher in supply chain and operations at the Bayes Business School. That's the new name for our school after Bayes himself. And this is part of a City University of London. One thing I would say about JIT is that I see that as an end goal, not as a means. There are different means, of course, to give you, for me, what that ideal goal is like. If you remember Star Trek New Generation, where Captain Picard, he goes to the machine, the converter or whatever it was called, and says, tea Earl Grey hot. And only at that instant, tea Earl Grey hot is produced. It's hot and it smells nice and he can have a good cup of tea. For me, that is the idealized JIT, but we have to keep in mind it's a goal. We try to get there, but we don't always succeed. And the means that we adopt to get there, like having flexibility, having small batch size, reducing lead time, those are again also aspirational. We keep trying. Tea Earl Grey hot is 0 lead time. In reality, there will be, more difficulties. And unlike many other people, I think now is the time, or during pandemics, that we need more of those tools. So we need more JIT effort, not less, given all these upheavals going on. So in supply chain risk, which is the area I work in, teaches us we need more JIT, not less.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, actually. Thank you all for a brief introduction as well as your perspectives of JIT. I also want to take this time to welcome all the guests from around the world who have logged in to this webinar. Thank you very much, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is also the first poll question that would be posed to the audience. And so if you would take a minute to respond to the poll. And while you're responding to the poll question, I do want to remind everyone back to the basics. This group does not probably even need this reminder, but if you remember, JIT was introduced as part of the Toyota production system in how they manage their manufacturing operations. We forget that actually the intent of JIT was really not inventory management. The original intent was quality management. How do you improve the quality by producing and monitoring just in time so there were not on one hand, a ton of work in process inventories, and on the other, finished goods inventory that might have a defect and had to be corrected after the operation was over. So with that in mind, then I want to go to our first sort of discussion question, if you will, the myth and reality of JIT or just in time. I may not ask every question with every panelist because then it gets sort of boring. But in terms of, how have companies been implementing and how have we as researchers understood this idea of myth or reality of just in time? Tom, I'll start with you, and then we will go around to maybe one other person.
Okay, so I visit Johnson Controls and I see, other than the inventory, in transit inventory that's in the back of a truck, I don't see any inventory between Toyota and Johnson Controls. Now, so one might think, at that point, okay, so just in time is really about eliminating inventory and so on and so forth. But that's not quite the case, especially in the context of Toyota. So Toyota, and as I think I appreciated Rachna's point about quality being the prime motivation behind just-in-time. I absolutely agree with that, meaning that you don't have this kind of synchronized just-in-time operation unless you've been able to synchronize the tech time between the two organizations, right? So in order to be able to do that, you really have to have good quality. Otherwise you can't really do that. Now, when the tech times are synchronized, you reach what Toyota refers to as haijunka or level production, right? So it's a pull system. So they pull demands. Now you think, oh no, wait a minute. There is a bit of a gap here, right? Because, market fluctuates, and yet Toyota is able to maintain level production. How do they do it? So this is where the myth comes in. People tend to think Toyota production system, JIT, Kanban, and all that eliminates inventory. Well, Toyota doesn't eliminate inventory. In fact, Toyota maintains rather large pool of finished goods inventory. That's the myth part. This is the reality, the finished goods inventory. The case in point is that you would see, for example, we don't get to travel as much during the pandemic, but when we were able to travel, we would rent cars and so forth. You go to these, fleet operations, the Avis and Hertz and so forth, you would see Camry there, whereas you wouldn't see Honda cars, right? So Honda and Toyota actually have different philosophy on how they manage inventory processes. But anyway, that's for another topic. But so in Toyota's case, they have this large finished goods inventory. So sometimes they have to dump their finished goods inventory onto the fleets. That's why we have this kind of situation on the downstream side. So that's the myth and reality part from my end. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Stephan, I also want to kind of ask you the same question. In our pre-conversation, you have mentioned a lot about strategic alignment with this idea of JIT. Would you like to kind of think about this myth and reality from that perspective, maybe?
Okay, maybe a myth is, in practice, I would rather say, that just in time can be applied to almost everything. And because it has been applied to almost everything, now we see the consequences of the messed up supply chains. From a strategic perspective, and this is what all companies need to do, is engage in the development of supply chain strategy. Look at the products, the product characteristics. For example, how many variants do we have? So why is just in time applied in automotive? Because we have these millions of variants that come out. Tom mentioned the seats that come in. They're not even delivered just in time, they're delivered just in sequence because of the variants. The right seat needs to go into the right car. So one myth is just in time can be applied to many things. I would rather say just in time from a strategic perspective, you need to have very specific product types. Another one is degree of customization. Another one is product value. I mean, it doesn't make sense to implement a just-in-time for a low-value item because of the complexity and the challenges that just-in-time has for implementation. We already hinted to this, and we'll get to this more, I guess. IT challenges, behavioral challenges, training challenges, zero quality challenges. I'm not going to do this for low-value items. So the myth is companies do not start with the strategy beforehand, meaning understanding really the product characteristics, product types. I mean, this is what we teach in classes, and the consequence is JIT fits or does not fit, and not JIT helps everything. It helps to reduce inventory, so that must be a good thing, and we try to apply it everywhere. And in the end, it's what I said at the beginning, means pushing inventory to the supplier. That's also not JIT. So the myth is that this is not done. I'm not sure whether this is a myth, but that's a misconception, a misunderstanding, the wrong approach towards JIS and JIT.
Yeah, so a fundamental misunderstanding of how we implement JIT, and from your perspective, JIT should be a consequence of your strategic alternatives or
Absolutely. There are often much better strategic alternatives than JIT because of the risks and the costs and everything, the complexity associated, and they might be equally good or much better and more suited.
Yeah, and I think this is aligned with what Nanda and Mohan had talked about in terms of the risk profile of the company. So Mohan, I'd first go to you, unless Nanda, you want to jump in and talk about the risk perspective. What is it? I'm sort of looking at, is it our misunderstanding that is exacerbating these bullwhip effects, or from Mohan's perspective, the risk profiles? So maybe I'll go to you, Nanda, first.
Yeah, if I may, Rachna, just piggyback on this, what has been said with regard to myth versus reality. It's very short. I thought what you said was brilliant, and I'm just piggybacking on you and Tom. But I think what a big myth is that JIT is focused on inventory. And I see it as what you had said, it started with quality, right? But it's a focus on eliminating waste. And when you start to take that breath of eliminating waste in terms of movement, anything, breath, if you will. When you think about the, takt time that Tom had talked about, the kinds of coordination required, just focusing on inventory is, I think, the biggest myth. I thought about just-in-time years ago. I remember walking into the office. There were two admins talking. One said, why is it that every morning we come in, we take the coffee pot down, and then at the end of the day, we put the coffee pot back? That sounds silly, but to me, that is one example of waste, right? It's that waste of motion, that every morning I come in and I move this thing, and then at the end of the day, I put it back. So when I expand my thinking process to think about everything in terms of eliminating waste, that's how I see just in time. So
actually, it also ties to to a chat question that just came through from Gopesh. It says, well, quality was after 1961. JIT was first implemented in 1931. So the idea may be that, because we were focusing on waste, it was actually focused on cost or cash flow, and ties into other performance initiatives as well. Mohan, going to you in terms of how do you see this idea of risk being either exacerbated because of JIT or better able to manage risk because of JIT? You brought that perspective.
Yeah, I remember even from the early days of supply chain risk in the early 2000s, there was this thing that lean and JIT reduce inventory and therefore will exacerbate supply chain risks. And in fact, even a few days ago in the Financial Times, there was an article that JIT is actually responsible for the kind of disruptions the auto industry faced with the chip shortage. And therefore, the best thing the auto industry has to do is to move away from JIT. So in a way, JIT equals inventory, and equals less inventory, and less inventory equals greater exposure to supply chain risk. So that is the myth. And what is forgotten in all of this is A, JIT is the goal. We want a system with less risk. And B, the things that will take us to that idealized goal, making sure we have working processes, making sure we control those processes so we can have level production, like Tom was talking about, hey, Junka, those are levers we use to get there. Flexibility, small batch sizes, all of those are levers which will help reduce risk for sure. Mm-hmm. Having control over your supplies and making sure your supplies flow smoothly, that reduces risk in the long term too. So this is one of those things where the myth and reality are diagonal, are 180 degrees apart.
So JIT does not equal less inventory from your perspective.
So JIT is an end goal. Yes, part of that is less inventory is a means to get there. But to get there, we also would have made our processes much more flexible. We would have low lead times. That means we have suppliers close to the plant if it's manufacturing context. We would have flexible production. I remember seeing flexible production at Sony in Tokyo. So we can do all those things. If we did all those things to get JIT, we would also overcome risk.
So any other perspective, Stephan? You're smiling. So do you want to add on to that?
I like what Mohan said, and let me add 2 or 3 other aspects. JIT properly implemented means I need to have close relationships with my suppliers. I need to collaborate. I need to talk to them on a very regular basis. I need to have an IT system set up to communicate. So we talk about digitalization. I need to understand the behavior. In the first place, I need to select a reliable supplier. I'm not going to implement just in time with one that I don't expect to be reliable. So all these things together, that's more external focus. In addition to what Mohan said, this reduces risk. This increases resilience in my system. So again, just in time, implemented properly with all the elements that come along with it, have the possibility to mitigate, reduce risk, and not the other way around.
So that sort of brings us to this question about why, maybe we've already answered it, but maybe someone can crystallize this in terms of why are we seeing all these issues of disruption and exacerbation with this disruption during the COVID era? In other words, why is JIT being blamed so much? Nanda, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Tom since he is nodding vigorously.
Yeah. So just to kind of backtrack, what Stephan had elaborated on, notice that he really mentioned the people part, right? In terms of relationships, and that we can't overlook that. So you have this close contact with your suppliers, with your customers. And I think the 2 answers are going to be, I'm kind of jumping ahead, are going to be digital, but not to forget to overlay to communicate. In fact, I was speaking to a large company a few weeks ago, and when they look back and they say, what was the best thing that we did? We actually called our suppliers and said, how are you? How are you doing? When you overlay that, it makes it work. Going back to your question, why are we blaming? I think that, we continue business, the world, we want a simple answer, a simple problem. So it's really easy to point the finger and say, oh, the problem is just in time, so let's move to just in case. And I think having done this for such a long time, I'm really kind of tired of that. I think that the answer moving forward in a broad way is going to be, we have to be more thoughtful, really more nuanced, but at a speedy way. So making these broad conclusions and saying it's just in time, that's really not the case. We have to be much more thoughtful. And I see it across the board, Rachna, where you see, oh, it's the containers are the problem. Yeah, that's it. No, it's the labor. That's the problem. That's it. And it's all of those things in this more holistic way. I think for businesses moving forward, to be able to understand the pieces is going to be absolutely critical. And I think this is where researchers come in, but we can't just have one solution and one problem. So I think it was very easy to point the finger at just in time when that really isn't the case.
So there is the media or our need for simplicity, but there are characteristics of just in time that either exacerbate this disruption, or our misunderstanding of characteristics that are needed for just in time that exacerbate. Tom, from your perspectives, can you talk a little bit about the factors and characteristics that might have contributed to this intense disruptions that we are watching all over?
Yeah, so before I do that, just to make things interesting, I see what's emerging here is 2 against 2. So myself and Stephan seem to have more of an operational view on JIT, and the Nanda and Mohan seem to have more broader perspective on JIT. So let's kind of draw the line in the sand, and see what happens. Okay, so with that, I will build
This was sort of done by design in some ways, by bringing, we kind of knew where you guys stood, but also to bring more interesting perspectives as well. But Tom, continue, please.
Yes. So I'm going to build on Stephan's last comment about good buyer-supplier relationships. So during the pandemic, there was a huge shortage in toilet paper. We all went through this, right? So think about that. So we all have a mental picture of what a toilet paper should be. So, like round and about yay long and, fluffy stuff and all that. What we didn't know is that industrial use toilet papers were in abundant supply. So if the contract was to deliver these little things, of toilet papers, then supply chain broke down. But had contract been more flexibly written so that it serves certain function, let's say, and then they could have delivered industrial use toilet papers, then we would not have had this kind of supply chain disruption. You see where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. The thing is, so here is the concept called incomplete contracts. Oliver Hart and another guy named Grossman received Nobel Prize on this concept a few years, or maybe about 5 years ago or so. It kind of goes like this. All contracts are incomplete. And what the lawyers would try to do is to eliminate incompleteness, make the contract as airtight as possible, right? But what Hart and Grossman proposed was that rather than looking at incompleteness as something to avoid, why not embrace it? Case in point, we have a community level, a supported agricultural agreement between the consumers and, let's say, farmers. If consumers, they write down, okay, 2 pounds of broccoli is, 1 pound of this and 1 pound of that, and so on and so forth, airtight contract, then when broccoli runs out, there is a supply chain disruption. But if they have an incomplete contract with the farmers and say, well, we'll take fresh produce, whatever freshest produce you have, we'll take and we'll consume, right? So if contracts are written that way, of course, it requires trust between buyers and suppliers. But if that can be done, then that would really help combat potential supply chain disruptions.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just the operational characteristics, the strategic characteristics, the relational characteristics that have come about, but also the way the contracts are written, yes, in terms of how we might implement or how we might appropriate the benefits from JIT implementation. If
right.
I
So when I visited Honda, they showed me their contract, the contract they have with their suppliers. It was just like this one little paragraph that said we will work together. And Toyota people told me that they more or less have the same thing. Mm-hmm. So think about icing fire. What happened there.
Mm-hmm.
So fire broke out, supply production line went down. And if Toyota as a buying company were to orchestrate the recovery activity, it could have taken anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months, right? But suppliers, they understood what needed to be done. They came together voluntarily. They figured it out, brought the line back up in a few days' time. Mm-hmm. Without really worrying about how am I going to get compensated for this, for that, and so on and so forth. They work together, right? Mm-hmm. That offers flexibility that helps prevent disruptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, these are all sort of very interesting aspects, but I do want to circle back to one idea. It's more an operational idea of shorter lead times, perhaps this aspect hasn't come out. When Toyota was implementing JIT, most of their suppliers were co-located. Mm-hmm. The trust factor or working with people probably was easier just because their suppliers were located closer to them. Now, when we think about our supply chains, they are physically distributed, geographically distributed. Contracts or relational aspects become more challenging just because they are so distributed. To what extent do you think the geographical distributed supply chains have played on these disruptions, or perhaps we are talking about just-in-time failing or exacerbating these disruptions? Does anyone want to take that up in terms of the geographical dispersion of supply chains and their impact on JIT becoming less effective, if you will?
I can talk about it, but go ahead, Nanda.
Yeah. So first I wanted to say too, is I disagree with Tom that we disagree. I think that we actually do agree.
I have to think about that one.
Right. I mean, think about it, Tom. You mentioned contracts, right? So think about all the things that we've said. And one of the things I think we have to marry the strategy and the tactics. I think one does not work with, if you cannot drill down into setup times, into batching, into all these aspects, then I think the ideal here is to get a team like we are, and to actually have experts that can do different, because they're all these pieces have to come together. And one of those pieces has to do, obviously, with the question you had posed with regard to physical distance. I mean, just by the nature, if you look at the equation, right, for safety stock, right, it does include, the number of days, the variation. So distance is going to play a factor. And once we have added on top of that issues in terms of, in this case, COVID and lockdowns, it certainly is an issue. So I think that technology to be able to use VR, we see a lot of companies using VR to be able to co-create, to innovate, can do it in real time, can do it together. So distance in many aspects of the manufacture, innovation process isn't an issue. But when it actually comes to physically moving products, again, distance does play a factor. You're absolutely correct. When we have events such as COVID come into play, and then when you overlay on top of it, for example, the details that are also important, size of ships. We have seen cargo ships increasing in size, which then, of course, as far as your batching and one delay or stoppage now is magnifying. Those things indeed have added to the shortages. So again, going back to what I said, I think that one answer doesn't answer it all. So yes, the distance has played a factor, but there are these other aspects, such as even sizing and batching and all of it, that have added to it.
Interesting. And Mohan, you were saying before, Nanda.
Yeah. Two things. Going back to the question you asked earlier about the issues that the auto industry went through. But anyway, two things I'd like to say. One is about globalization. There were many causes of globalization. And then the second is competition with other sectors. So talking about the second one first, for the auto industry, the chip shortage also came because of competition with the electronics industry, or competition from companies like Tesla, who had lots and lots of cash from shareholders coming in, so they could pay any price and get the chips. Or even in case of Tesla, they use those to make, they use the chips that were there to make the more expensive models, because that helps both with the bottom line, and you can say it was a more flexible contract or an incomplete contract with customers. Instead of a $30,000 car, you sell them a $50,000 car. It works. So competition with other sectors, this is not something which is the purview of JIT. But the other idea that originally with co-location, you had low lead times, you had small batch sizes. Now there are many reasons into globalization, including specialization, low costs, geographical markets. But without getting into what causes globalization, let me just say globalization means we are moving away from all of the things that we are trying to do when we are trying to do JIT. We are increasing lead times. Nanda has mentioned we increase batch sizes because now we have these super cargo ships carrying millions of containers. And so we are moving farther and further away. So then we are surprised, oh my God, things break down. We are running out of toilet paper or whatever. If you move away from JIT and you're experiencing more disruptions, isn't it more likely that disruptions are not caused by JIT, but disruptions are being caused because you're moving away from JIT? So that's why I say JIT is our idealized goal. If we move towards it, we are better off both in terms of risks and operational excellence, more resilience, all the good things. We move away from it, and we still say, oh, I have less inventory. Well, then you're just asking for trouble. And with COVID and geopolitics all around, all those fears have come true, or the risks have become reality.
But Mohan,
Stephan, go ahead. Actually, I was just going to go to you with an addendum, but go ahead. And there are a bunch of questions in the chat that I would also like to ask. So Stephan, you first, and then.
When Mohan started out, I wanted to say I oppose, because you're talking about these global supply chains and you associate them with JIT. In the second part of your answer, you say this is not JIT anymore. My question to you or the audience or in general would be, tell me one global supply chain that is based on JIT, delivering whatever from China, toilet paper into Europe. This is not a JIT-based system anymore, because it misses small batches, it misses short lead times, it misses synchronization of takt time, and many other things. It's just not JIT anymore. So I would even say in these global value chains, global supply chains, we don't have JIT. And this brings us back to what Rachna asked at the beginning. For JIT to function, you need close distances. You need small batches. So just in time, in my view, I cannot say, I would say maybe a small percentage of our deliveries that we receive in Europe in our manufacturing operation are delivered just in time. And 95% is delivered based on just in case, vendor managed inventory, and other systems. So it brings an overall answer. The current shortages that we have are not due to just in time.
Exactly.
I give another good example is lumber. There's a shortage of lumber. I mean, is lumber ever delivered just in time? No way. Insulation material, never, no way. But still we have a shortage. But the reasons are different. And it's not due to insufficient or not appropriate just-in-time delivery. So that's so we need closeness. We need definitely closeness. We see this automotive. We have used these examples over and over. In Europe, in the Czech Republic, you have your sorting centers run by logistics service provider, 3PL providers. They do the buffering, they do the sequencing for the plants, delivering to the plants. So you need close distances to where the demand is, where the JIT components are being built in.
Thank you for arguing my point even better.
Sorry, Mohan, but
I was just going to say collectively, Rachna, we've answered the question. Stephan did it beautifully, right? The answer to all of it is, I think we all agree, it's not, the problem isn't just in time, but that we're actually moving away from just in time.
Yeah.
That is correct. And so I was going to say, as most supply chain researchers, we have come to the defense of just in time and found, why it may, although it is being blamed, it should not be blamed because of the way we are implementing an idea where it was not supposed to be implemented, or the founding conditions have changed in some sense. This toilet paper example has brought a lot of chatter from the audience. So one person suggested, well, Trader Joe's was able to stock their shelves because they found alternate supplies of toilet paper. So they went after a hotel, toilet paper manufacturers and suppliers. And so Trader Joe's was never out of toilet paper. So there are ways, if you have close relationships or if you have flexibility to move to an alternate supplier, it is possible. Another person also noted that we are talking about just in time as if it is a standalone phenomenon, but it is not. It should be implemented with a bundle of other practices and other tools. And so when you pursue something by itself, it may be a cause for failure as well. And then the last one, I think we've answered this question. That just came through. I'm reading it. Can JIT be the objective while considering realities of an existing supply chain at an item level? Finished goods specific supply chain risk analysis at the network level may not permit JIT at present. Given this question in terms of supply chains are already existing for most of the manufacturers, there does not seem to be an appetite, at least from the US perspective, bringing much of the manufacturing back. Where do you think we go in future, especially at the item level that we are talking about? It also sort of aligns with, Stephan, your idea of lumber shortage is there. Because of lumber shortages now, the housing renovation and all the other cabinet makers, they're all running sort of behind. But if your item level is not working on JIT and there is a disruption, the supply chains are already set. How do you how do you get out of it, I guess, is what the audience member is asking. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll say something.
Okay.
Sorry, Mohan.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So to Toyota, Heijunka has been a religion. They stuck to it rigidly. But then they, what I hear coming out of Toyota is that they have started to relax it. In other words, they started to expose their production lines to market fluctuations a bit more than they used to. So what's the implication? Number one, at least Toyota as sort of as a birthplace of JIT as we have considering. I mean something else, Mitsubishi Shipyard and all that, but still, so JIT concept is not a rigid concept. They're adapting it, right? So they're starting to realize certain item level, inventories have different characteristics with different lead times, geographical dispersions, what have you. That is why they are starting to relax this religion that they had adhered to for so long. So exposing, their internal product. So moving forward, to go back to your question, Rachna, I think it'll be interesting in future to kind of look at this dynamics between, level production and the location of inventories in appropriate places in supply networks, right?
It's sort of interesting. I'll say two things about it. The first one being one of the most important things that we want to stress is the strategic alignment idea. You cannot implement any initiative unless it is strategically aligned with your competitive business market goals. And so JIT works if it is strategically aligned with that goal. The second piece I would like to kind of bring to the audience is, if you all remember when when Japan had the hurricane and tsunami, and when they re-evaluated their supply chain, they found, well, one of the biggest places where their supply chain was not resilient or was prone to disruption was semiconductors, meaning the chip manufacturers. At that point, then they decided they were going to hold 6 months of inventory for all chips that were required in manufacturing their cars. Now, some would argue, well, that is not JIT and that is not waste elimination, that is excess inventory. I would argue that that is a great understanding of your own supply chain's vulnerabilities, risks, as you've called it, and their strategic goals of we want to have to some level Haijunka, and we want to be able to keep our supply chain manufacturing operation going. So in that context, having this excess supply of chips, which might go in shortage, really helps our ultimate strategic goal. And I think we do not do that kind of deeper analysis of our own supply chains. And that's why we sort of get into trouble. There are a lot of questions coming through. One last point on this, and then we want to move on. Stephan, since you were going to just start talking, I would give you the floor.
Well, I challenge that the example that you mentioned might have been done, that there's a chip shortage and they put then 6 months on inventory, but this is not just in time anymore. This has nothing to do with just in time. This is just buffer inventory in a regular inventory.
That's it.
System.
That is it. So
it's not just in time anymore.
Perhaps I agree. So we are aligned. I completely agree with you. I'm talking about how it was written up in the press in terms of Toyota moves away from just in time. My perspective is actually it is not moving away from their own, from just in time or whatever they were calling it. It is looking at their supply chain very strategically to understand where the breaking points were. And in Toyota system thinking, it is excess buffer to make sure that the supply chain or manufacturing operations in this case does not break down. So I think you and I are talking exactly the same way. I was talking about the critics of Toyota production system at that time wrote many articles in the popular press talking about even Toyota contains excess inventory and moves away from just in time when it is needed. So that's where I was coming from. One comment that I want you guys to perhaps our panelists to respond to, Kyle wrote, insulation lumber are seasonal. Investing capacity doesn't make sense. So this issue sort of comes in many times in terms of at what point does taking excess cost in the supply chain make sense? It is not truly sort of topical to our just-in-time idea, but how would you respond to managers who are making decisions on a unit cost basis analysis and trying to figure out, where they need to put either excess inventory or excess capacity? I mean, does anyone want to take that?
Can I answer that? That's a rather simple question, not easy to calculate, but lost sales versus investment into capacity building up inventory. So if the lumber, trader says, I'm not able to sell my lumber when it's needed and I lose sales and margin there, the decision would be I build up inventory earlier to compensate for this. So that's easy to calculate. I think that the question that was posed is easy to answer.
I mean, it's also the time. It's also
sorry. Mohan, please go ahead.
So meaning there are 3 tiers. There's inventory, which you can use right away and sell from it if possible. Then there is capacity, and capacity can be used to convert raw material into finished goods inventory. So if it's a question of how long it takes to make that conversion. And then there is a 3rd tier, what I call as capability. capability to create capacity.
Yes.
And that takes longer time. That's why we have educational institutions, we have R&D labs that will create capacity, and then capacity will create inventory. Of course, depends on the time we have between, and this is what we saw with the whole ventilator issue. We tried to change automotive industry into ventilator capacity, and then ventilator capacity into ventilators, but obviously that didn't work very well because the capability wasn't really there.
Yeah. So in the US, actually, Medtronic and General Motors were able to manufacture ventilators because they were able to kind of reconfigure both their operational resources in terms of machines, equipment, and also their people resources. So it can be done. Kyle, we'd wait to hear from you if you have a follow-up question to Stephan's answer to your initial question. So moving away, looking forward as we stand today, do you think JIT will be abandoned, or is it sort of here to stay? And in what capacity, in what form might it stay if you see it post-pandemic? So I'm asking you to sort of think about, do we abandon JIT, or do you think it stays, and then in what form does it stay? So 3 parts to my question.
I can respond.
Yeah, so Mohan, go ahead. Since,
no.
Yeah,
so what we have to think carefully about, and this is something Tom mentioned earlier about having inventory in different places. I'd just like to formalize that by saying inventory is a push-pull boundary. There'll be some supply chains which will be pull. In that pull supply chain, everything will be JIT to whatever idealized extent. Now, that pull supply chain will interact with other supply chains, like chip. The auto industry will try to buy chips from the chip industry. So there, that industry might also be pull industry, but in between those two, there will have to be inventory. And the size of that inventory will depend on who's consuming it, lots of things. So maybe 6 months of inventory for Toyota for chips might be too small in some sense. If the chip industry, if TSMC or the other companies cannot guarantee Toyota that they can supply within a 6-month horizon, then maybe 6-month inventory is not enough. So what we, in an idealized world, what we would like to do is that in these globalized supply chains, maybe we don't like globalized supply chains, but they are a reality, and they're only going to get more global. In those globalized supply chains, we have to tease apart which supply chains are the pull supply chains. So within the pull supply chain, we work JIT. Then there are some other supply chain, which is also a pull supply chain, but the boundary is where there will have to be inventory or capacity or capability, depending on how much time we want to allow. But yes, they will be defining very carefully where these push-pull boundaries are, and they're putting in inventory or capacity or capability in those boundaries so that those individual sub-supply chains can work in JIT way. But to maintain Heijunka or level production throughout this global supply chain, we will need to have the push-pull boundary carefully defined with the inventory, capacity, capability to make it work.
This is an excellent sort of insight. So what we are collectively sort of agreeing on is we understand the myth. We've sort of addressed the myth and reality of JIT. What are the founding conditions under which JIT flourishes? We are sort of in looking forward saying, well, global supply chains are here to stay. Perhaps JIT has a role in these global supply chains. In order for them to work, Mohan, you are laying out sort of the 2 or 3 criteria. What did not come through is this whole idea of transparency in the supply chain if global supply chains are here to stay, and the role of your supply base or suppliers. Tom and Nanda, I want to kind of go to you because you both work very deeply into this network idea of transparency into the supply base, transparency into your first, second, third tier suppliers. I know, Tom, you are you're currently working on a project on that. Would you like to talk about this importance of transparency in these globally dispersed supply chains?
Yeah, so many companies are starting to do supply network mapping, right? So I talked to one of Toyota's semiconductor suppliers, chip suppliers, Renesas, and Renesas, has gone ahead, and after the tsunami incident, they've mapped their complete supply network, which took, according to them, 100 people over a year, right?
Oh.
So what that gives them then is a transparency, as you put it. And once you have that transparency, you can do what Mohan suggested. Now, I'm gonna give a credit to my colleague Jan Olhager at Lund University in Sweden for what I'm gonna say next, is that goes along with Mohan was trying to promote there, is that we need to think about whether your supply chain is focused on make to stock, make to order, assemble to order, or engineer to order, whatever. These variances will require different stocks to exist in different locations in supply chain. Leave it at that. Yeah.
And Nanda, do you have anything to add to this idea of transparency and it comes back to business models. Because we are supply chain professors, we all come back to make to stock, make to order. So in that context, if you want to say, and Stephan, I know you're thinking, so I'm coming back to you next. So Nanda, go ahead.
Sure. To answer your first question, are we going to abandon? I emphatically say never. I don't think that we ever will. I think that will not happen. However, and there are the caveats that we have just heard, beautifully put. I think it is important to note that we have to really segment supply chain. So we tend to talk in these broad terms: Toyota supply chain, GM supply chain, and we really have to step back and say, no, there really are, product categories, product groups, and we really need to create optimal segments. And I think more and more AI is capable or can help us defining workable optimal segments. And I say workable because obviously we can micro segment to each individual product, which is not efficient. So then how do we segment? And, as you all know, my area is forecasting. I learned long ago that we can create product groups. We can have AI help us create product groups that can sometimes be illogical, but that have various products that have certain commonality in terms of characteristics and in terms of product life cycle and in terms of sourcing and so forth, that we can lump together. So we want to create workable supply chains that we can manage, but that can ultimately have different flavors, if you will, of just in time. I think that's where the answer lies. The answer lies, we never abandon JIT and say we're going to go to blanket, it's over. But I think we work with AI and technology to be really clever and nuanced to create workable supply chains where we can forecast better, have transparency, but not full, because then we get into another area that has to do with cybersecurity. And so it becomes, again, no blanket where we could say we have full transparency, but we have to be surgical, and technology is going to allow us to be able to do that, to be able to have different versions, pure just in time, and moving into different variations, as have been noted, based upon the kinds of supply chain segments we have. And I think the other part I'll just add to this, looking at the network, understanding that these supply chains that we have segmented actually create an overlapping network where we can borrow from one to the other when we have disruptions in one, to be able to, switch over. So it's a very much a dynamic process of cleverly defined supply chain networks and different versions of just in time operating in each one.
So you said a lot. Let me try to sort of disentangle before I get to Stephan just very quickly. Starting with Mohan, Tom, and your comment, basically global supply chains are here to stay. There are different models in the way companies compete. So whether it is make to stock versus make to order, each of these supply chains based on some underlying characteristics will require this pull-push boundaries, and where these pull-push boundaries reside is where we would have to have, I'd call it buffer inventory, not excess inventory, but inventories that allow that model to work well. I think I probably captured some of the underlying themes. Stephan, you were going to sort of add to that a little bit.
Yeah. Let me address two issues. One is, I like what Tom said, and I agree that more and more companies do supply chain mapping to figure out where are their suppliers, how many tiers do we have, what do they deliver, understand maybe even the contracts. That would already be probably a good best practice if they would know what contracts they have. This is one. However, Rachna, you said transparency. We need this in these global supply chains, real time, online real time. So this is not what the supply chain mapping tells us. This is, we need technology, and this we do not have yet. We have all these few examples, Maersk having a transparency with the blockchain system through a number of countries, but this is not full scale yet. Maybe retailing, they have this more in the country, yes. Once it goes global, this is less the case. But this is something we need to work on. And technology can help us to do this. So digitalization, blockchain, industry 4.0, whatever you call this, long way to go still. This is one aspect. And the other aspect is, in the end, and this is basic supply chain. In the end, it's about making money. It's about shareholders. It's about, how much do I pay? How much does my supplier pay? How much profit do I make? And this, in the end, is still and will be, and even more once we are in a global setting, not a problem, a barrier towards implementing smoother supply chains where we have transparency over where is the inventory, where's the order penetration point, how much inventory do we have? And this is not going to go away. So we need to, the first thing we can do, improve transparency with technology, but the other point is still also is going to stay. Let's go to just-in-time. There are large German automotive manufacturers. They want just-in-time delivery. They force their supplier to co-locate next to them. They know what the price is. The suppliers get in real trouble if they don't deliver just in time. So is that a collaborative relationship, as we said at the beginning, which is key to just in time? No. So this is a relationship aspect. Transparency is needed to improve global supply chains.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is very interesting. Knowing your supply base, meaning knowing your supply chain, if you will, for second, third tier, very critical. How do they share information brings up thorny issues. Whether I can trust the focal firm to hold my cost information in confidence, not so sure without having all the trust relationships. I do want to point to sort of one study that we are doing that shows very negative effects of transparency in a supply chain setting. So transparency is not always necessarily good. Under some conditions, it really does result in bad performance. But the second aspect comes from an audience question. I think Morgan Swink asks, maybe it is resilience now and JIT is future. Perhaps his comment is, I do not know the context of the comment, but it is coming through because we have a lot of disruption. If any one of you wants to kind of respond to, is resilience more important and maybe JIT comes in future? Mohan, I could pick on you because you study disruption and resilience.
It's like having a finance portfolio and saying, do I want reward or do I want returns or do I want risk? they're both there. So we need to deal with both resilience in the sense we want stable goods, but we also want goods that are profitable for the company and low cost for consumers. So this is not either or. So these are just different attributes of supply chains. And to the extent our supply chains are JIT based, supposing in that ideal world, localized everything, then we know the risk is low. Visibility is quite high because the supplier is only 50 yards away from your factory gate. Everything is working very well. The question to really ask, if I were to rephrase Morgan's question, is given that supply chains are globalized, given the supplier base is geographically dispersed, what can we do to make sure we still get goods at effective prices and we don't have that in case of disruptions, because there's always acts of God and acts of man, then we can recover and continue what we were doing before. And to that, I call what you call as transparency, I call as visibility. And I would like to add that there is a third aspect of visibility. Tom mentioned about just knowing where your suppliers are and where their suppliers are and where their suppliers. That's why it took 100 people a year to figure that out. That is a start. And then Stephan mentioned we also need to know their real-time status. But the third thing we also need to know is where should the idealized push-pull boundary be? Mm-hmm. Not all supply chains work in the same, what you may call takt time. So we need to have those boundaries defined, and we don't need to pretend that everything is going to be working. We just on the same takt time, especially when supply chains are catering to many different industries. So we need visibility so that we can figure out where the push-pull boundaries should be, where there needs to be a buffer inventory or a buffer capacity or a buffer capability.
Mm-hmm. And I think the audience, I just want to kind of go to the audience poll. The question I asked was, are we going back to JIT at some point in time? 66% said, well, we are going back to using JIT after the pandemic. About 33% said maybe not. And other people have also talked about, agree with this idea of how resiliency and JIT are linked together. Tom, you were saying, and then I want to kind of switch to my third sort of pillar for today. So a comment from you, Tom?
Yeah, so in terms of resilience, I want to, and also what might happen after the pandemic, there is a concept being thrown around, at least in my circle, is this concept called the regression to the tail. Mm-hmm. So you think about that, right? In other words, we think major disruptions will occur more frequently in coming years. Think about, the COVID-19 and its variants and with episodic recurrences that, epidemiologists anticipate. Think about the trade wars among superpowers. And then sort of like mini superpowers around the globe. Think about the climate change. Somebody mentioned climate change in the chat box, meaning that, climate conditions oscillate, right? Meaning that we're going to see more extreme weather patterns, either really hot, really cold, and so forth. So we think, we're gonna see these events. So resilience is important, I think, in coming years. Number one. Number two, to what Stephan said earlier about, having visibility or like in having blockchain stuff and all these, it's not AI, not enough. We don't really know what's going on. And I wanna introduce a company called Resilink. Mm-hmm. So CEO's name is Bindia Vakil. The basic idea behind this company is this. if there is a bridge collapse in Bangladesh, let's say, right, hypothetically, that's going to affect somebody's supply chain, where are we going to see this first? We're not going to wait for 6 o'clock news to hear about it. We're going to see in social media, let's say. Somebody's going to take a picture, put it up on Facebook, Twitter, whatever the case may be, right? So this company scans the world for these postings. And of course, they sanitize the data, they do all sorts of things. So they sell this kind of information to their clients, right? So there are these companies that are popping out, working with large corporations. And going back to this idea of having visibility to supply network, why is that important? Why is it important to maintaining, level production or level flow or throughput throughout the supply chain? Is because on the upstream side, if you're a small player needing, let's say, particular type of semiconductors, let's say, you may not have realized you're actually competing against a large corporation like General Motors. But in the real sense, you are, because you and General Motors need that particular type of semiconductors. So you being a small player, you have no idea who your suppliers are. But General Motors, having worked with Resilink, for instance, know that. And they move in first, reserve inventory. You're out of luck. So I think in coming years, we kind of need to think about how to protect small to medium-sized enterprises as well. I know that's a different topic, but it's one that near and dear to my own heart. So maybe someday we'll get to talk about it.
But very quickly, there was a recent survey done by the Economic Research Institute in Germany, and they said SMEs will more likely build up inventory than the large ones. And this exactly reflects what Tom said, because they know they will be second in line. So
yeah, and also it actually brings us full circle to Mohan's starting point on globalization and competition. Although we cannot do anything about competition, that's where we might have to think about small, medium, and large firms and who holds inventory where. Actually, the bottom line then becomes knowing your supply chain the best possible will allow you to, whether it is through visibility, whether it is through visibility, transparency, supplier relations, technology, doesn't matter, but knowing your supply chain intensely, very extensively, is the critical key to sort of succeeding in implementing JIT. I talked about my third pillar. I want to give you about maybe, we have about 13 minutes, say 2 minutes each on a research project that either you are involved in or a research idea that you think would be very relevant in this situation or something that you might be passionate about. So keep in mind 2 minutes each. Who wants to go first? I mean, I'll just leave it to whoever wants to go first. First come, first serve.
I think different, methods to map supply networks. There are many different ways. I mean, the one I used was using bill of materials, but there are other ways. For example, I heard about a sort of a subsidiary of Foxconn. The company name is Chain Finance. It's a fintech company, and basically what they say is that the vendors, they can come they can play for free, but if the investors are interested in playing, or I'm sorry, I reversed that. The investors, they want to play, then they have to pay a fee. Vendors, suppliers, they don't have to pay, but they have to give up their supply chain information. But I'm thinking like, whoa, right? This would be a beautiful way to actually start to build supply network. So I think different techniques or ways with which to map supply network, I think will be important. Another thing is the idea that Mohan proposed, and then one that myself and Jan Olheger are working on, is to think about where to put inventories across the supply chain, depending on what kind of production mode you have, push, pull versus make, engineer to order and so on and so forth.
Tom, it ties very well with President Biden's sort of initiative on pharma supply chains. So there is a huge project that is going on with Amerisource Bergen, and they are studying where in the pharma supply chain should they put different types of inventories. API manufacturing is never coming back, meaning the main component molecule manufacturing may not come back to the US. But once you can secure the supplies of that, where in the pharma landscape should excess inventories reside? A very exciting project that I'm a part of. Stephan, would you like to go next? Whoever wants to go, I don't want to, so yeah.
I don't want to give a very specific research idea. It's more an approach towards research that we should take. I have two suggestions. One is, I just recently read, I think, an excellent study by economists. They talk about forward industrial linkages, backward industrial linkages across companies, across countries. And this shows how supply chains, their global value chains, that's their term, are linked abroad. US 6%, Europe, it's more 20%, China is going down. Very interesting. And a research idea, a request would be, we should work with them. I mean, they do their stuff. We know the operational stuff. They don't. So this is one avenue I think we definitely should pursue. And as a second idea, we should maybe, as a research community, go away a little bit, although I do it myself and I blame myself, from using CompuStat, Bloomberg, all these financial data to map supply networks, supply chains, and supplier relationships. Do we learn anything about just in time there? Not really. So we should do more what Tom did, go out to companies, talk to companies, collect primary data on these issues that we talk about. So these are more two general approaches or recommendations, I think, that will bring the field forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Easy data access is the key to publishing. I think we tell our PhD students, but as we grow into the profession, I think it is very important and useful to think about it more deeply. Stephan, if you wouldn't mind, if you have access to the article you talked about from Economist, we can put it on YouTube channel later on or in the chat, and Tor can do that. Nanda, let's go to you.
Sure, thank you. So I think with COVID, I really felt the push to go back to my roots in forecasting. And, I had initially, I've done so much work in forecasting, started out quantitative, and then working with companies, I really moved into the space of, human judgment in tandem with technology. And then how do you design supply chains in response to that, and where do you place inventories and all of it. COVID has really pushed me back into that, and I really marveled. Pre-COVID, I remember December 2019 talking to companies in Boston, and we're talking about these great robots and machine learning algorithms. And then next thing I know, we're in March and I'm seeing a New York Times article showing me how to cut my own face mask, right? And how to make it and sew it by hand. And I remember thinking, how did this happen, right? We sort of went back. And then we're sitting around looking, if you remember, I mean, what a difficult time period that was. But all of us, I think, were sort of glued to various networks looking at all these math models, right? We had the Johns Hopkins model, we had the, Washington model, Imperial College of London model that were trying to tell us, forecast what was going to happen with the pandemic. And then you had the experts sort of juxtaposing their opinions on it. And it really revealed to me, again, where my roots in research were and where I am going now in terms of the need, the criticality, regardless of how sophisticated our models are with regard to the clean data, which is something that I worked in for years. And even now, we have all this data, but is data reliable as we forecast the future, whether it be the pandemic? How does it impact demand? What kind of data are we using? How do we integrate human judgment of experts? What defines an expert? And at what points do we automate processes, and where do we integrate expert knowledge? And I think it revealed to me what I had done years ago, and I'm back to doing this work right now, why it's important, because algorithms alone cannot make these forecasts. Whether, again, we're talking about the pandemic or demand or new variants that are going to come out, or whether, Eastern Europe is going to have a surge in demand, with the new iPhone, it doesn't matter. Forecasting and integrating digital AI with human judgment and expert judgment. And how do we do that? And then how do we translate that into resilient, responsive supply chains? And that's really, I feel like I'm in grad school again because I'm really passionate about it, but those are the areas where I'm working in right now.
So human-centric supply chain issues is what you're interested in. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. Mohan?
I'll quickly respond to Nada's comment about data on pandemics. I was working on a project with Italian scholars on trying to predict the number of cases in the short term so that you could increase the number of the capacity of beds. And there we found that the number of daily deaths was a much more reliable number than the number of daily cases. So we had to rework the epidemiological models to use the number of daily deaths, and from that infer the number of actual daily cases rather than the reported cases, and then use the epidemiological models and their stochastic variance. So we actually have tools to be able to use the dirty data that we have. But in terms of your question about research ideas, so I have two. One, I haven't quite started yet, although I have a couple of papers. It's the same thing Tom mentioned earlier about SMEs. And Stephan also said something about German SMEs. So
Mohan, just as an aside, we only have 1 minute. So if you could quickly wrap up, we need about 2 minutes to close. Thank you.
So for SMEs to be able to run efficiently without carrying excess capacity or excess inventory, as Stephan mentioned, we need to create shared commons. Commons is an old English village idea where you have common. So to what extent we can have commons where the small companies can then focus on GIT or efficiency, just like large companies. So building commons is what we can help small SMEs survive, and how we can work. And then the second idea is that at the push-pull boundary, we are talking about inventory or buffer inventory, but instead of inventory, can we have capacity or can we have capability, which is one step further away? And what might all that look like?
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. And I apologize for rushing you through that. We only have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to very quickly sort of summarize and also thank our audience for participating in the poll. I do think we came to some agreement, at least in one of them, whether inventory is should be or should not be part of supply chains. Audience agrees it would be. What would be dependent on? It should be dependent on the supply chain conditions. A vast majority said that. So I wanted to share that with you and the audience. I also wanted to thank all in the audience as well as the panelists for attending and join us in future events, both future webinars as well as mini conference. I do want to spend, maybe I have 2 minutes in summarizing what we have learned. What we learned was JIT as a principle is very valuable. It is here to stay. It should be matched to the strategic situation in which the company finds itself, and then do a deep dive into visibility, transparency, and understanding the competitive situation in which it finds itself. Having that and understanding the characteristics for which JIT was just in time was designed, and accommodating that for the changing world is the key to JIT remaining vibrant in future. With that, I thank my panelists again and the audience again. Hope to see you in near future in another webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachna.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
All of you.
We can stay. I think it is over.